Astrologically, Scorpio, there is a meaningful reason this kind of story speaks so strongly to your sign. Scorpio's symbolism is concerned with what moves beneath appearances, the agreements that bind people together, the trust behind an exchange, the resources we share, and the emotional consequences that remain long after a situation seems finished on the surface. So when communication, money, or an unresolved relationship begins moving again, the important question isn't simply, what am I getting back? It may also be, what is this showing me about the way I have learned to trust? That distinction matters because a financial delay rarely stays purely financial. Waiting for money you're owed, recognition you earned, or an answer that affects your security can slowly change the way you hold yourself. You may become more cautious, more self-reliant, or less willing to depend on promises, even when you don't consciously notice the change happening. Scorpio often understands this instinctively. When something valuable has once felt uncertain, part of you may begin guarding the door before anything new is even tried to enter. This is why the movement around you now is better understood as a gradual current than a sudden cosmic announcement. Something that has felt buried, suspended, or difficult to read may be becoming easier to approach, and that can include practical matters involving compensation, shared resources, debts, agreements, work, or an opportunity that never fully disappeared. The external development matters, of course, but so does what happens inside you when it arrives. Can you receive good news without immediately searching for the hidden cost? There is a deeper Scorpio lesson inside that question. Transformation isn't always the dramatic destruction of an old life, followed by a completely new one. Sometimes it is much quieter, like water slowly changing course around stones that had been in the river for years. You recognize that an old defense once protected you, but you no longer need it in every room you enter. You realize that discernment and suspicion are not the same thing, just as vulnerability and helplessness are not the same thing. And this is where the two movements in this reading begin to meet. One may become visible through the material world, a payment, an answer, an agreement, an opportunity, or simply greater clarity around something that has remained uncertain. The other happens below that visible layer, where your relationship with security begins to change. What returns externally may bring relief, but what loosens internally may ultimately give that relief somewhere to stay. Give yourself a little quiet space to notice that distinction. You don't need an elaborate ritual or a perfect state of mind. Even a few undistracted minutes can reveal how much your body has been carrying on behalf of your thoughts. Notice your shoulders, your breathing, the tension around your chest or stomach, and then ask yourself gently, what am I still preparing for, even though it may no longer be happening? Don't rush to manufacture an answer. The value is in noticing what rises naturally. You may remember other times when change first appeared as a subtle internal shift rather than an obvious event. Perhaps nothing around you had visibly changed, yet something inside suddenly felt quieter, as though sediment had settled and you could see through the water again. Some people understand moments like these through intuition or spiritual alignment. Others recognize the presence of God in that unexpected stillness. Whatever language feels true to you, the experience doesn't have to be dramatic in order to carry meaning. We are often trained to look for answers in the loudest places, but some of the most revealing changes arrive almost silently. A thought that no longer frightens you, a name that doesn't tighten your chest the way it once did, or an opportunity you can finally consider without assuming it will disappear, can tell you something important about how far you've moved internally. So ask yourself, have you recently sensed something changing before you could explain what it was? Have you noticed yourself responding differently to something that once had immediate power over you? That is worth paying attention to, Scorpio. Not because every feeling predicts the future, but because your responses can reveal where genuine psychological movement is already taking place. Whether you understand that movement spiritually, religiously, intuitively, or simply as the result of everything you've lived through, it invites you into a deeper kind of trust. You don't have to know exactly what is coming in order to recognize that you are meeting uncertainty differently than you once did. And that changes the meaning of abundance here. Abundance doesn't have to arrive as an astonishing windfall to matter. Sometimes it looks like recovering access to something that should never have remained unresolved for so long. A delayed payment finally moves. Someone honors an agreement. A professional opportunity resurfaces, or a financial entanglement becomes clearer and easier to address. The practical benefit is real, but for Scorpio, the deeper emotional question may be whether the experience begins restoring your confidence in reciprocity itself. The Six of Pentacles gives us a useful symbol for this part of the story. Traditionally, the card draws attention to giving and receiving, but in a Scorpio-centered reading, it can also invite us to examine the invisible terms beneath an exchange. Who holds the power? Who carries the obligation? Whether generosity comes with strings attached, and whether receiving makes you feel grateful, exposed, indebted, or genuinely supported. Those questions matter because money is rarely only money when trust has become woven into it. So if something does circle back in the near future, allow yourself to see it clearly before deciding what it means. It might be a refund, overdue compensation, a grant, repayment from someone who finally honors their responsibility, or an offer you assumed had quietly disappeared. Yet the most revealing part may be the moment you realize you can accept what is rightfully returning without shrinking over explaining, or waiting for the ground beneath you to give way, and that quieter change may already be moving underneath everything else. Scorpio, the star, offers a gentler way to understand what may be happening here. Its hope isn't the fragile kind that depends on everything working out exactly as you imagined. It is the kind that survives because you continue tending to your life even when there was little evidence of movement. Think of roots beneath winter soil. From above, the landscape could look completely still while an entire system remains alive underneath. Something taking longer than expected doesn't automatically mean that everything you invested in it has disappeared. That becomes especially important around money because a meaningful financial return doesn't have to arrive as some spectacular windfall. It could be an unexpected deposit, a policy or decision shifting in your favor, a client recognizing the value of your work again, or someone finally honoring an agreement they left unresolved. The amount may matter practically, but emotionally, the experience can carry another message altogether. It can remind you that a delay and a permanent loss are not always the same thing. And for Scorpio, there is another layer worth examining. What did the waiting teach you to expect? Perhaps you became more guarded with money, more reluctant to depend on anyone, or more likely to assume that anything promised could eventually be withdrawn. Those responses may have protected you during uncertain periods, but they can remain long after the original situation has changed. So if something begins moving in your favor, receiving it may involve more than checking your account. It may ask you to notice whether you can accept support without immediately preparing for disappointment. You may have told yourself before, if it truly belongs to me, I don't need to chase it forever. There can be wisdom in that thought when it means refusing to let one unresolved outcome consume your entire emotional landscape. It isn't a guarantee that every lost dollar or missed opportunity will return, but it can create enough inner space for you to distinguish persistence from fear. Sometimes openness simply means remaining available to a possibility without building your whole sense of safety around it. That same clarity can extend to the money already in your hands. Consider giving what you have three simple purposes. Something you protect for future stability, something you use to support growth, and something you allow yourself to enjoy or use for genuine care. The point isn't to prove to the universe that you deserve more. It is to show yourself that you can meet resources with intention rather than panic. For someone who has lived through financial uncertainty, that quiet sense of stewardship can be its own form of reclaimed power. Money also has a way of entering the body long before we consciously admit how much pressure we're under. Notice whether financial uncertainty has been living in clenched shoulders, shallow breathing, a tight jaw, a restless stomach, or thoughts that keep rehearsing the worst possible outcome. Those sensations don't mean you're preventing abundance from reaching you. They may simply show how hard your system has been working to keep you prepared. And sometimes recognizing that effort is the first moment the body realizes it doesn't have to remain on watch every second. Try asking yourself something simple. What would change in me if some of this pressure lifted? Don't rush toward the most responsible answer or immediately create another plan. Give the question enough silence to reach beneath the practical concerns and touch the emotional ones. You might discover that what you want from money isn't extravagance at all, but room to breathe, greater independence, a calmer home, or the ability to make choices without fear standing over your shoulder. This is why seemingly ordinary financial developments can carry surprising emotional weight. Imagine someone who spent months trying to recover compensation from a former employer and eventually received what had been owed. The payment itself would matter, but so might the recognition contained inside it. After being ignored for so long, being acknowledged could restore something that numbers alone cannot measure. The deeper relief might come from realizing, I wasn't unreasonable for expecting my work to be respected. So ask yourself, Scorpio, if an overdue payment, opportunity, or piece of financial clarity appeared today or in the near future, what would actually change inside you? Would you feel safer, more independent, more hopeful, or simply less exhausted from having to keep one part of your attention fixed on uncertainty? And once that pressure eased, what would become possible that you haven't had the emotional room to consider? Those questions prepare you not by predicting what will happen, but by revealing what receiving means to you. Because underneath the financial story, another current may already be moving. Healing doesn't always introduce itself through a conversation, an apology, or a clean explanation. Sometimes you notice it as an unexpected exhale when a familiar memory surfaces. You hear someone's name and feel your chest tighten, but perhaps not as sharply as before. Or tears arrive during an ordinary moment when you thought that chapter had already been packed away. The body sometimes reaches what the mind has carefully stored before language catches up. If an old person has been appearing in your dreams, or a memory has returned with unusual vividness, you don't have to interpret that as a command to go backward. It may be more useful to ask what the memory still activates in you now. Scorpio's deeper work is rarely about reopening every closed door. Sometimes it is about discovering that you no longer need to stand guard outside one. What once demanded constant emotional protection may slowly be losing its authority over your present. This is the quieter second movement running alongside the material one. One form of relief may arrive through greater financial stability or an unresolved practical matter becoming clearer, while another emerges through the gradual release of something you have carried internally for far longer. It may feel less like a dramatic breakthrough and more like rain reaching ground that has been dry for months, slow enough that you almost miss the moment the soil begins absorbing water again. The change is subtle, but your inner landscape starts responding differently. The Ace of Cups gives this part of the story a particularly rich symbol. It is often read as emotional renewal, love, openness, or the beginning of a heartfelt connection. Yet renewal also requires somewhere for fresh water to go. Sometimes the cup begins to fill only after you acknowledge the grief, resentment, attachment, or old longing that has occupied that space for years. And for you, Scorpio, that may be where the next layer begins to reveal itself. Not through forcing yourself to forget, but through noticing what your heart is finally becoming ready to hold differently. Forgiveness can become part of that opening, Scorpio, but perhaps not in the way people often describe it. Real forgiveness doesn't require you to pretend something didn't hurt. Restore access to someone who broke your trust, or erase the boundaries you built afterward. Sometimes it simply means resentment no longer gets to occupy the most protected room inside you. Whether the unfinished story involves a parent, a partner, a friend, or a younger version of yourself you've judged for choices made under pressure, softening can begin without rewriting what actually happened. Water offers a fitting symbol for this process because it doesn't heal by arguing with what stands in its path. It moves, settles, reshapes, and finds another way through. If rain has been catching your attention, if the ocean keeps appearing in your dreams, or if you felt unusually drawn toward rivers, lakes, long showers, or quiet baths, you might use those images as invitations to reflect rather than signs you have to decode. Ask yourself what in your emotional life has become stagnant and what might be ready to move again. Sometimes the image that keeps returning is valuable simply because it gives a feeling, somewhere to speak. Give that feeling a little room without forcing it into confrontation. You could sit quietly tonight and write down the name of someone, or perhaps an earlier version of yourself, who has occupied more emotional space than you want to keep giving them. Instead of reconstructing every argument or proving who was right, write one sentence describing what you no longer want to carry forward. And if forgiveness feels premature, you can begin somewhere more truthful. I forgive myself for carrying this for as long as I needed to. That distinction matters because release cannot be measured by how quickly you stop feeling something. You might still remember the betrayal, disappointment, debt, or responsibility someone left behind, while noticing that your body no longer prepares for the old conflict every time the memory returns. Maybe your jaw doesn't tighten as quickly, your thoughts don't rehearse the same conversation, or you no longer feel compelled to explain yourself to someone who isn't even in the room. Those small changes can be more meaningful than a dramatic declaration of forgiveness. Consider someone who has carried both emotional hurt and financial consequences from a difficult family relationship for years. Their healing would not need to produce an unexpected check 3 days later in order to be real. Perhaps the first evidence would be that they finally look at their finances without hearing the old person's voice in their head, or make a decision without organizing it around fear inherited from that relationship. That is where emotional freedom can begin affecting practical life, not through a magical transaction, but through clearer choices. Once less energy is spent defending against yesterday, more attention becomes available for what actually needs you today. So, Scorpio, who or what are you becoming ready to set down? Not because the past suddenly deserves your approval, but because you may no longer want to determining how much trust, tenderness, or possibility you allow yourself in the present. You don't need a ceremonial goodbye, and you don't have to force yourself into peace before you're ready. If you feel called to leave a comment, let it be something simple and true. I'm making room for what no longer needs to hurt in the same way. And as that inner space changes, you may begin noticing your physical surroundings differently. Nothing has to be obviously wrong with your home for a room, object, or familiar arrangement to suddenly feel as though it belongs to an earlier version of your life. Maybe there's a drawer you haven't opened because of what it contains, an old letter you keep moving from place to place, or a corner that has quietly become storage for things you never consciously chose to keep. Even the light entering through a window can make you realize how long something has remained untouched. For Scorpio, home can be explored symbolically as more than a beautiful or orderly environment. It can represent privacy, emotional safety, memory, and the places where you lower your defenses when no one else is watching. That makes the urge to clear something out especially interesting, not as proof that an astrological event is forcing change, but as a possible reflection of changing priorities. Sometimes you recognize that you've grown because an object, habit, or arrangement that once made you feel protected now makes you feel confined. This isn't necessarily a desire to escape. It may be a desire to reclaim space from things that have been silently holding an old emotional atmosphere. Open the drawer. Remove one object whose meaning has expired, delete the note you no longer need to reread, or pull back the curtains in a part of the room that has remained dim. Small physical acts can become tangible ways of saying, "This space belongs to the person I am now too." Your nervous system may notice those changes before your mind gives them much importance. 15 quiet minutes spent clearing a surface, changing the bedding, opening a window, or moving something that has felt visually heavy can create a surprising sense of breathing room. The purpose isn't to manipulate an invisible frequency. It's to make your environment less crowded with cues connected to unfinished stress. Sometimes a calmer room simply gives a tired mind fewer things to brace against. If you want color to support that atmosphere, think in terms of mood rather than mystical rules. Deep burgundy can bring warmth without becoming overly bright. Charcoal can create visual quiet, muted plum can suggest introspection, and dark teal can preserve the water motif without repeating the pale ocean palette associated with the earlier balance-centered imagery. Choose what makes the space feel grounded and inhabited rather than what supposedly activates Scorpio energy. The symbol only works when it actually means something to you. And if a number belongs in this part of the story, 8 offers an interesting artistic motif. Its continuous shape can suggest endurance, recurring cycles, and the possibility of meeting familiar territory from a different level of awareness. You don't need to treat seeing 8 as a prediction or promise. Let it function more like a small visual reminder that returning to an old subject doesn't necessarily mean you've gone backward. Sometimes you return because you're finally strong enough to relate to it differently, and that changing relationship may already be showing itself in the spaces, memories, and choices you are beginning to see with new eyes. If the number 8 has been appearing more often than usual on a receipt, an address, a clock, or somewhere ordinary, you don't have to decide that it predicts anything. Let it become a personal symbol, a reminder to notice where you are repeating old cycles and where you are beginning to respond differently. Sometimes the signs we notice simply reflect something we already sense beneath the surface, offering a quiet question: what am I ready to approach differently now? I've seen how one small change in your environment can create surprising clarity. Someone clears a shelf connected to an old relationship, opens a drawer they've avoided, or moves their workspace toward natural light, and suddenly the room feels different because their relationship with it has changed. Soon they may find the courage to answer a message, begin a conversation, or recognize an opportunity they were too overwhelmed to see before. The change didn't create magic, it created space for attention and action to move in a new direction. So if you've been feeling restless in familiar surroundings, Scorpio, pay attention. Ask what your environment may be reflecting back to you, not only through objects, but through your routines, boundaries, conversations, and the way you speak to yourself. You don't need to rebuild your entire life overnight. Begin by noticing what still belongs to you and what you may be holding on to simply because it has been there for so long. You might quietly ask, what here still belongs to a version of me I'm beginning to outgrow? It could be an old letter, a box from the past, or a corner filled with unfinished things that still carry emotional weight. You don't need to remove everything immediately. Sometimes simply understanding why something remains is already the beginning of a shift. Transformation rarely arrives with noise. Sometimes it begins by opening a window, moving one object into the light, or deciding that an old reminder no longer needs the same place in your life. Scorpio, movement does not always mean leaving. Sometimes it means allowing your present life to better reflect who you are becoming. Some changes do not require a dramatic leap. They ask for stillness the moment when an old reaction appears, and you choose whether you still want to follow it. After spending so long protecting yourself by expecting disappointment, preparing explanations, or keeping an emotional exit nearby, the deeper work becomes learning that you can stay aware without staying guarded all the time. This is where simple actions become powerful. Write down what you truly want. Place your hand over your heart before the day becomes busy. Or say, I'm ready to meet what comes next differently. These actions do not control the future. They simply return your attention to what you can participate in, instead of what you cannot control. You don't need to force yourself into a new chapter or pretend to feel confident before you are ready. Emotional growth can look like answering the message you've avoided, reviewing your finances without panic, or setting a boundary without needing to justify it endlessly. Each choice gives your nervous system new evidence that you can face uncertainty without abandoning yourself. If you want a phrase to hold this intention, try, I make room for what I can receive without betraying what I've learned. Openness does not mean forgetting what experience taught you. It means understanding which defenses still protect you and which ones now keep you from moving forward. Think of this process as a current rather than a chain of events. One small choice shifts the direction slightly: drinking water before reaching for your phone, stretching before sleep, clearing one neglected space, responding to something difficult, or forgiving yourself for reaching your limits. No single action changes everything, but repeated choices slowly reshape the path you return to. One person I think of began a simple morning practice. Before drinking her first glass of water, she paused and noticed how tense she already felt. The practice itself did not create an opportunity, but it helped her recognize how often she started each day expecting something to go wrong. As that tension softened, she became clearer and more able to respond when a new opportunity appeared. That is the kind of change worth noticing, Scorpio. The shift may not be that life suddenly follows your intentions, but that you no longer approach every possibility from the same defensive place. Presence allows you to see what is actually happening before old fears decide the meaning for you. If you feel called to mark that intention, leave this affirmation in the comments. 8. I'm ready to receive without carrying the past with me. Let 8 represent continuity, resilience, and renewal, rather than a promise of a specific outcome. Your words do not need to control the future. They simply honor the direction you're choosing. More importantly, remember that you are not standing outside your own life, waiting for someone else to decide when you can enter it. You do not need to be chosen, rescued, or perfected before you can respond to change. Readiness is not perfection. It is being present enough to notice what is opening and what no longer belongs. Ask yourself whether you can receive something good without immediately searching for the reason it might disappear. You can remain discerning without assuming every opportunity carries hidden loss, and you can protect yourself without refusing every form of support. Perhaps the key has been in your own choices longer than you realized. The movement ahead may appear through ordinary moments, a financial matter becoming clearer, an opportunity reopening, a needed conversation finally happening, or an emotional weight beginning to loosen. These changes do not need to arrive dramatically to be meaningful. Sometimes external shifts create space for the deeper internal work of learning how to receive. Not every key is meant to reopen an old door, Scorpio. Sometimes it reminds you that you are free to leave a room you have outgrown. The past may have taught you vigilance and independence, but those lessons do not need to become walls around everything new. You can keep the wisdom without remaining inside the circumstances that created it. Think about the strength it took to continue when answers were unclear. You carried responsibilities, stayed honest when it was difficult, and kept moving even when certainty was unavailable. But resilience has another stage beyond endurance, realizing that the armor that protected you before may not need to be worn every day. You are not erasing what happened. You are changing the place from which you remember it. Like standing beside deep water and realizing the current that once pulled at you no longer reaches the same shore. You have not forgotten the experience. You have simply found steadier ground. Carry these questions with you. If something in your life became more workable, how would you act differently? What would change in how you speak to yourself, manage money, protect your time, or respond when a boundary is crossed? Who are you ready to stop arguing with inside your own mind? And what would you say yes to if you no longer expected every opening to become another disappointment? What deserves a clear no now that you understand the cost of abandoning yourself? These questions are not asking you to force optimism. They're inviting you to notice where your choices already want to become more honest. Insight becomes meaningful when it enters daily life. It may look like reviewing a financial situation you've avoided, answering one important message, resting when your body asks for it, or setting a boundary without defending your right to have one. Each grounded choice reminds you, I'm not standing still in the same place anymore. If healing is part of this journey, do not measure it only by whether difficult feelings disappear. Notice whether you return to yourself faster after old memories appear, whether certain names carry less weight, or whether you can remember the past without expecting it to repeat. Healing is not always a door closing. Sometimes it is water slowly revealing the ground beneath it. The same perspective applies to money and opportunity. If something delayed does return a payment, recognition, an answer, or another chance, allow yourself to receive the practical relief without needing it to prove your worth. Let it show you something about your relationship with security and your ability to accept support calmly. Rather than waiting for one dramatic moment to prove everything has changed, notice the smaller evidence gathering around you. A conversation you handled differently, an object you finally move, a financial decision you can face without panic, or a boundary that feels like self-respect instead of rejection. These quiet moments can mark the point where an old current stops deciding your direction. If you want to anchor this intention, write AT, I'm ready to receive without carrying the past with me. Let it be a reminder of renewal, resilience, and the direction you are choosing. The deeper current may already be shifting, and with each clearer decision, you are learning how differently you can move with it.